All right, and we're up. Hi. Oh no. The video is frozen though. Is there a huge lag? I'm just gonna message the admin for a moment. Sure we can fix things before we start. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, there's a 30-second lag. Oh, there's always a lag. Okay, this is my very first time streaming on Twitch, and I'm used to teaching on Zoom, so it's a little bit of an adjustment, but we're doing okay. Okay, hi, I'm Maria, and welcome to Watercolor Wizardry. Today, I'm going to be painting Errol, who is a grave cleric from one of our upcoming campaigns run by Kristen. It's going to be premiering June 6th at 5 p.m. And this is a homebrew 5e campaign. So this is a homebrew god that the cleric's going to be worshiping. We're going to be working on designing a holy symbol, figuring out the basics of the character. Usually when I do character commissions, they give me some things to go on, but kind of how much they give me is based on the person and how clear of an idea they have for what they want. So for things that are streamed where I want a little bit more detail, I have a form that players fill out. So I have a few different things that I'm going to be pulling from. Namely, he very handily made a Hero Forge character for me. So I'm going to be looking at that and pulling from a couple other references as we work on this character. All right, so I know that this character is bald with blue skin and a flat nose. They have an investigator background and a sly expression. All right, so let's go ahead and get started as I pull up my reference. I have a couple different things I kind of want to play with. I have some expressions and I have some face shapes. So usually what I do when I start is, first of all, I get my materials together. So I'm using Schminky watercolors for anyone who is following along at home and kind of, wants to do their own D&D character art. I usually have a separate palette and some FW acrylic ink. I really like FW ink because it's watercolor, or sorry, not watercolor, it's waterproof. And so if you lay it down, it's not going to smear. If you lay down a wash, it's not going to reawaken. And you always want to make sure that's on a separate palette because it's going to dry in flakes because it's acrylic, as opposed to something that can be used again. So it's going to get all these little flakes in your watercolor if you combine them. I have my water. I like using a pipette. A pipette just lets me quickly transfer water onto my palette when I need to. I have a couple different kinds of brushes. I have Raphael Kolinsky brushes and Winsor Newton Series 7 watercolor brushes. You can tell that a brush is good when you dampen it. And when it's damp but not wet, it should come to a sharp point. And that's how you know that it's easily usable, because you can get both a thin and a thick line from it. I also have a Croquill nib or dipping pen, which I use to get really fine lines with some watercolor ink pieces. I'm not sure if we'll be using this yet, but I like having it out. And then of course I have my pencil sharpener. I really like using these Dux pencil sharpeners because they can get super, super fine points. So I'm going to start by sharpening my pencils because I was drawing earlier today. They're not as sharp as they could be. And we're just going to be doing a waist up piece. So I'm going to start by just sort of really lightly roughing out the general shape that I want for this character. So usually I do 3/4 views. I think it gives the most dynamic angle. I like it best. So I'm going to be doing a 3/4 view, thinking about the face shape. Usually people are about 8 heads tall. I'm going to be doing about 4 heads. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That gives me up until about here to draw the person. Looking at that, I'm going to pull out their torso. And I have a torso shape picked out already. So I'm going to be copying that for my reference. This character is slim and lightly muscled. So I'm assuming they aren't going to have anything really clunky going on. But usually what I do is I sort of block them out without muscle, and then I add the muscle on later because it's a lot easier to work outward from a form than to just sort of trace an outline. There's less structure to it. Usually the waist and the elbow come to about the same point. So I'm just going to quickly pull down those and make those like quick stick figure legs. Because this person has an investigator background, I really wanted reference where someone had their hands steepled. I was debating for a minute if I wanted them steepled like up by their face or if I wanted them kind of down low. And then down low feels a little bit more confident. And I think that since this person is blessed by a god, maybe they have a little more confidence to them. So I'm going to very quickly just sort of like rough in their hand shape, and we'll keep that low steeple over here, sort of roughing in where some of their fingers are. I feel like they're a little maybe clunky and awkward with their hands because if they're investigators, like I see them using their hands a lot. So I'm going to give them kind of big hands and fingers because I feel like that's a very important part of their characters, like touching and looking at things. And then now that we have this really rough shape, I'll go back and we'll concentrate on building up the head and moving down and adding detail. But I want to make sure that roughly this kind of works out. I'm realizing on the screen it's a little bit hard to see. Let me pull up my facial expressions. I want to make sure that I have center line over here. And once I stop like roughing these things out and I have a better idea of what I want to do, I'm going to switch over to this pencil, which is a lot darker. This is called a 2H pencil. Pencils that are HB are halfway in between bold and hard. Bold means that a lot of graphite comes off when you draw, and hard means that not very much graphite comes off when you draw, so the line is lighter. I like using a 2H for laying things out because the 2H is a little more forgiving. So if I draw something and I don't like it, it takes almost no pressure with an eraser to actually get rid of that line. This is a 2B pencil. It's just like the standard school pencil that you get, and it's pretty bold, 2B versus 2H. So it's 4 levels bolder than this one is. So this is the one that I'll be doing my final line art with. And this one is thick enough that it generally shows through the watercolor and you can get a lot of detail there. And then if it ends up being a little light in some areas, I'll go back and I'll do some line art in watercolor that's covered. So in the meantime, I'm going to be just really quickly roughing out some general face shapes, and I'm popping back over now to just get a really quick look at some of the distinguishing characteristics of the character to get a better idea for what I want their eyebrow shape to be and a couple other things. And they are described by the player as calm, thoughtful, and cunning. So if they're cunning and maybe thoughtful, I want to give them kind of a heavy brow. And I'll keep those kind of close together because I think you furrow your brow and it's close together. I know they're bald, so the eyebrows are probably going to stand out even more. Nose is going to come in, but not out too much. I know the character wanted a flatter nose. And I think I'm going to pull up my expressions here. I want kind of like a cocky smile or cunning smile. And what I've noticed is that a lot of cunning smiles are sort of lopsided. So we've got like a smile on one end, but not on the other. So the character's right-hand side or our left-hand side is going to be smiling less, and the bottom is going to be smiling some more. Sorry, and the right is going to be smiling some more. There we go. And I love drawing women, and I have a tendency to make my men a little more feminine. So I'm going for some really deliberate, blocky, streamlined shapes so that I don't make the mistake of making him look too feminine. Let me go ahead and put my eyes in, and then I'm going to switch over to the other pencil. I try not to use my eraser if I can help it, but if I do, it's usually at the stage where I'm blocking in these features. If I keep the eyes not fully opened, meaning if I put like the brow up here and I make them feel a little bit closed, I think it's going to make them look even more sly. The eye needs to end a little sooner. Maybe the eyebrow does too. All right. That's what we got so far. All right, I think this is working okay. I'm okay with this. I think he looks a little bit sly, and that's what the player wanted. So I'll go ahead and start inking this, or not inking this. Going in with like a darker pencil and solidifying some of these lines. go. I think I will. I think he's looking a little bit too sneaky. I'm going to raise the eyebrow a little bit. The farther down you go with the eyebrow, the less like hopeful or open the expression gets. So if I raise the eyebrow a little bit, it's going to make them look a little bit more, not innocent, just like it's going to soften the expression that I've given the character. I think that works a little bit better because they look like they're wise to things, but they don't look like they're scheming. And I think it's so hard to know just from a Google form, but I'm assuming the vibe the person was going for was like intelligent, not necessarily plotting anything. I don't know. I could be wrong. All right, I'm going to block in like just a couple basic shadows. I'm going to go over and reinforce these later with watercolor, but I like pointing out, you know, like some areas of shadow that are going to be prominent. This kid has a dark past, so I'm going to give him some bags under his eyes. I want to make sure the fulcrum, the area under the lip, you know, like most of the common areas have a little bit of shading added to them. And then let's pull back to their skull. And I'm going to be pretty light about this because they're bald, but they have some sort of covering. I found a couple head wraps that I really liked that I want to play around with, but I want the shape of the skull to be there initially so that I know what I'm doing. I'm just going to double check the description and make sure the character doesn't have like pointy ears in their description. I don't think this race has pointy ears. I'm going to double check though. They're Vidalcan, which I know the basic races and a few of the extended ones, but I'm not super familiar with this one. So I'm just double checking other people's fan art to see if they've got pointed ears or not. Oh, it looks like they do. I'm glad I checked. They're really, really slightly pointed. They don't come to a major point. Oh, and they've got a little bit of like a overhang on some of them. Or like there's less there. All right. Right, they've got like almost like like it reminds me a little bit of a cat ear where this part is thicker and then it fades really quickly into the rest of their ear shape. And it looks like the rest of it is like a normal ear. I'll go ahead and shade that in normally. All right, nice. I'm liking that. They feel sly, they feel angular. They don't feel overly aggressive or muscled. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to exit out of that. And that's about as much as I use my reference. The color, the rest of it, and the rest of the shading is going to be a little bit more open. I'm going to give them, usually if someone is, you know, like slender and cunning, they'll have like higher cheekbones. I think it makes them look a little bit more devious. I think maybe this needs to come down a little bit more too. Because they are angular. I just don't want them to be unnatural. Like they're humanoid though, not human. So I guess it's not a big deal. It's okay if their face is a little overly angular. That kind of works. I'm digging that. Shade the rest of that part. Okay, yeah. Exit out of that reference. And then what do I still have left to do? Let's go ahead and move over to the body. All right. I think if he's just lightly muscled, I'm going to give him kind of a skinny neck because I think it's going to emphasize the slyness. I think when you make someone look kind of beefy, it doesn't emphasize their head as much because it's making other things, you know, like larger. And if you have a difference in proportion, that thing is more likely to stand out. So if I make the head wrap a little bit bigger and this stands out as a larger area, and then there's a neck, and then it moves over to this medium shape. I'm trying to think of shape hierarchy because usually when you do a character, you want a large, medium, and small shape for them to look aesthetically pleasing. So if I give him, you know, like kind of medium bulkish armor, and that's a large shape, we have a medium shape for the head and the hands are a significant shape. I think that'll work out. I just need to be especially, I'm going to block out like some things with the head wrap. I want to be especially kind of bulky with it to make sure that's higher in the shape hierarchy than the hands because I know I want him to have big hands. All right, and then I'm going to go through here and just block out where I want his rib cage to be so that I can be mindful of his center line when I'm blocking in his armor because the armor design he chose has a little bit of symmetry to it. At least it has parts on both the left and right. And I want to make sure I'm pretty true to that. It doesn't look like it's angled away from the character, the way they're wearing it. So I'm going to start in here, and I'm going to move back over to this pencil because I need to block out the form and figure out how bulky they are. And then I need to go through and I need to draw the armor on top of it. So I want to make sure that, and their clothes, I know, how much width their arm takes up, and then I'm going to add width on top of that for the armor. And the model I have is actually wearing loose clothing. So this is just me kind of winging things. I feel like kind of gangly characters that use their hands a lot would have like longer arms. So I'm going to give him like slightly larger than normal arms. Here's the deltoid. I want to make sure, maybe we'll pull the trapezius out a little bit more just to add a little muscle. I don't want him to be like anorexic. So he did say lightly muscled. We'll give him like a little bit of a bicep, but not very much. The arm will come forward, so it'll be a little thicker. It's going to cut off the torso some, come in like this, but still feel, the tricep will come out a little bit, but it's still going to feel kind of like angular and blocky. All right, and then if this comes down, note that you don't want to draw your characters at right angles like this. The elbow actually curves down and in and ends not down here, but over here. And I want to make sure, okay, if his hands are here and you pull your hands up, you should be able to, have your palm rest on your shoulder. And that's not the case. So I actually, I'm glad I checked that. Ooh, I'm sorry, I'm bumping the mic. All right, I'm going to bring the hands in a little bit. So I need to rough those out again. So if this is where his palm is going to be, okay, I think they can still come out, just not quite as much as they were before. Okay. I'm doing kind of like a big muscle here. I'm thinking kind of like Chris Sanders. He did Lilo and Stitch. He does this thing where like usually the top part of the arm or the top part of the leg is thicker than the bottom part, but he actually makes the bottom part thicker, and it gives like a weird, like kind of chunky, warped view to the muscle, but it's really kind of appealing. And I feel like that sort of like funky alien style, maybe because Lilo and Stitch is an alien movie, is kind of reminding me of this a little bit. So I'm going to make this muscle a little thicker than it needs to be. And now I'm going to go back through, and hands are always hard, so I want to make sure I'm following my hand reference. And I'll switch back for this again. I want to make sure that the other pencil is being used here because the hands are not going to be covered by armor. I don't think he's wearing gloves. At least that's not something I saw in the description. All right. Got the bulk of the thumb muscle up here, coming out. And this model has kind of bulky hands, but I'm going to make this one have slightly more slender hands because the character is slender, and I want to make sure the hands match the character. It's kind of a fine balance because you want graceful characters to look graceful, but if they're not women, you don't want them to look too feminine. And usually the way you make something look feminine is you make it smaller and graceful. So I'm trying to like the edges of the thumb can be kind of wedge shaped and chunky, but maybe the size can be a little more gangly. I don't know, hopefully this works out okay. All right, just sharpening my pencil again. I love the tiny sharp edge I can get with this. This lets me add a lot more detail. So this character's fingers are coming in, and he's steepling his hands kind of like this. But what I want to do is I'm changing my reference a little bit. I'm going to put some pressure on the hands so that they're pushing out a little bit as opposed to coming in. It feels like there's a little bit more intent behind whatever the character is thinking if they're exerting some sort of pressure here. And I'll try this, and if it doesn't work out, I'll just switch back to what I was originally looking at. All right, I'm gonna just move these fingers together. These are called California hands when you draw these two hands touching each other. I just think it looks good. But it's an art style for drawing cartoons that was popularized in California. All right, how's that? Is that okay? I think this hand or this finger is way too thick compared to the others. So I'm going to pull that in a little bit. Okay, it's looking okay now. I'm going to give, you don't ever want to have a sharp line between the fingers. It's always curved. I'm going to give a little bit of indication of the knuckles here. All right. No, that works okay. All right. I gotta do the other hand. Of course, this one is at an angle, so we'll see how it goes. I really like that you can see a little bit of the thumb here. There's so much foreshortening in this hand. I feel like at that point, at this point, it can sort of, like go on, be something else. But here, okay. I think I need to pull this down a little bit to accommodate for the angle change I made. Otherwise, it's not going to look like, there we go. Okay, does that work? That doesn't really work, does it? I think the finger needs to end earlier, maybe. It's also going to be in shadow when we draw it. So, or sorry, not draw it, paint it. I think that's fine. You can see this one. This one's important. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to darken the line around this one. And when you darken the line around something, you give emphasis to it and you make it feel more important. And it'll draw focus away from the other one anyway. There we go. I want to play with this thumb a little bit more because this area here is looking a little clunky. I think what I'm seeing is that this is going to come up more. I'm a little happier with that. And he's still got nice big hands. I like that. Okay. I think since these are kind of sideways, I'm just going to add a tiny bit of shading to them. Over here, we're going to see his, too much of a boob. We're going to see his pecs come in, and then his hand is going to be moving around it. His arm, his other arm. So since his elbow is kind of coming out and back, I think we are still going to see some like foreshortening over here. There we go. And let me double check his armor from Hero Forge. I think he's got like a, yeah, he's got like a tie or something. Okay, so we'll add in that tied belt over here. We can end with like a diaper fold or something. Not a diaper fold, a pipe fold coming down here from the belt. That works. Okay. And we'll have a medium, small, large, medium, small shape. Okay, that's working out okay. So I want to go through and I want to take a look at this head wrap reference real fast and play around with it. I love hair forms, and this guy doesn't have hair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this sort of turban. It's not I don't think it's a full turban. Maybe I'm just not familiar with the different kinds of turban wraps. But I'm going to use this wrap and I'm going to pick the parts of it that are trailing down and move them kind of like hair in order to frame the character's face. So this starts pretty close to the eyebrow, but I feel like this guy wouldn't want to get cloth in his face because his eyes are so important to him as an investigator. I'm assuming he's got like a lot of perception skills since he's a wisdom-based caster. And I would imagine investigation as well. I don't know exactly what the investigator background grants you, but I'm assuming investigation and perception are big with this character. So I'm going to keep this out of his face and pull it a little higher than it is in the photo. And it goes over the ears. I feel like investigators don't want their senses being covered. So I'm going to pull it behind. I like how it has like all of these wraps kind of coming down. But I want it to be kind of big. So I'm going to take these lines and sort of pull them out. And I don't think at this point it's very realistic that it would stay this way, but I do like how it's framing part of his face and I can kind of shade in this area. And I do want this to be bigger to sort of emphasize this is a shape. I'm going to go through and just kind of play around with it. At some point, this is going to kind of come down and in and start wrapping around. And I think there's like a piece of cloth here. Comes undone. Maybe shades the back of his neck a little bit. So it's not going to be quite as big as the rough outline I did. I just don't know if I can justify making that look even remotely believable if I went out quite that far. But see that I still have the head here. So I know there's a lot of layers of fabric between his head and everything else. But I'm glad that I did the head because now it's not lopsided. Like I can pull this up and in and make it pretty symmetrically around the head without worrying about the head not being in the right position and this feeling like it's skewed a little bit. Now I'm wondering if I should give it some sort of a pattern. Okay. Oh, the player just commented. He has a passive 16 perception. So yeah, we'll keep that out of his head. He's got to be able to see stuff. Accidentally put my arm in my palette. Usually when I stream, these things are not quite so close together, but I wanted my palette in the shot so that you guys can kind of see how I mix my colors. And of course, these are all well mixed already from many different past painting projects. Okay. I definitely really liked this rough shape that I put in here. And I think to an extent, as long as I give the vague indication of it having like some folds of some sort, I don't need to explain how it wraps in the back. And I can kind of use this as just a framing device. Yeah, because I like the way that's shaped. I actually kind of, if I fill that in, that could be pretty cool too. I kind of like the idea of a lot of it kind of coming down his back, especially if he's wearing this so that he doesn't get sunburned because he's light sensitive, which is I think what the character put. I like the idea that he had extra fabric just in case he needed to cover something. And also, if your hero canonically has a ton of extra fabric in their costume, you can use it for other things if you need to think creatively. There we go. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. I'm not going to keep messing with it. So at this point, we need to go through and start adding some of the armor so that he doesn't look naked. I'm going to go through and pull up the Hero Forge character because he has some pretty specific armor and the player did ask for specifically the armor that the character was wearing. So I can see they've got, looks like a leather pauldron that's just sort of sticking out. And it looks like they have I think the wrap that was on the character is kind of moving over the neck. But it looks like the armor has like some sort of a collar that's moving straight out. Go ahead and add that. I feel like the Mandarin collar works with this vibe because it's got a lot of straight edges. And I like the idea that the character is sharp and angular, and then they have this flowing form around them. It doesn't really show the rest of the neckline. So I'm going to go with, oops, got to pay attention to my center line here because that's where everything breaks. I'm going to go with like a tiny little V-neck, but I feel like the character would have maybe something underneath it. I'll just put like this slight hint of a shirt. I don't think they're the type for it to have like a really ostentatious collar, just something to be comfortable. And then I'll just emphasize the Adam's apple and pull this, I think it's called the sternocleidomastoid. Just give that a little bit of a shadow to show there's some cording and muscle on the neck. There we go. All right, I feel like that's working okay for now. All right. This pauldron, it looks like, is attached to the collar. So I'm gonna do some stitching along here. Pull this out. It actually, oh, you know what? I think they're separate pieces. So this is just like, I guess to give the impression of a shoulder pad or something. And it looks fairly flat. That might be Hero Forge though. I'm gonna curve it. A little bit, and I'm going to change the angle to make it a little more interesting so that it's slightly more interesting shape. There we go. And then I just need to make sure I do that on the other side. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of visually measuring the distance between here and here, which is where my center line is. And if this is a symmetrical costume, then the costume has to be the same, come to the same point on both sides, more or less. So I know that since there's, you know, this area is moving away, since it's a 3/4 view, that the area or the space between here and here needs to be larger than the space between here and here. So I'm putting this in as closer, and I know it goes to the shoulder, like right over here. Just making sure that's the same angle. It curves around a little bit. We're not going to see as much for this one. And it moves directly into this collar. It's just going to be in shadow mostly anyway. Most of the detail I'm spending on this side, and then I'm just kind of giving the impression of it over here, and the eye will assume that it's mimicked. All right. And then from here, there's like another piece that comes out. I like these little spiky things that come down. It works with his angular shape language, and they kind of move in over here. All right. You know, I don't think the circles are working. He's got like these grommets that attach everything together, but I'm going to make them squares. I just feel like this character doesn't have soft shape language. Also, squares are great because they give more of an impression of the angle something is at. Circles do too, but you turn them into ellipses and they're just not quite as clear. All right. Let's pull this out. I just want this to barely cover his deltoid, which I'm glad that I marked the muscles out. And this will come out and in. And I think, is this, well, the player is here. Is this like custom armor that was made for him? I'm wondering if I should put maybe like the holy symbol over here too, or if it should just be down here. While I wait to hear, I'm going to start working on the other piece. This comes in and over, and then we'll move out and down. I'll start adding some stitching along here because it looks like leather armor. I want to make sure it reads like that. All right. Possibly custom, but not necessarily. Okay. I like the idea of like part of this symbol being on the armor though. So it's a crossroads with like fire on it. So we'll just do like a nice symmetrical symbol like that. And the grommet can be on top of it. Let's see, he's got like these tiered armor pieces after that. And then I can't quite tell what he's wearing apart from that, but I am going to give him just like, I guess, a plain shirt. And I'll keep it kind of thin. I think this character, they're like a investigator. Maybe they're thinking a little bit more about just having their sensitive skin covered than they are about armor. I would imagine they want a lot of flexibility to go through things. So we'll just keep this fairly close to the skin. I'll do a couple spiral folds here. And then as we get closer to the elbow, we'll want some half locks. Maybe some more subtle ones if this is thin fabric. The thicker and the larger like a fold is, the more emphasized it's going to be and the larger the shape of it is going to be. But if we have like really fine fabric, it's not going to have like a ton of large shapes. It's going to have a lot of like very small, fine shapes to it. That seems just fine. And then I'm going to loosely imitate some of this over here, but I do think the armor would stop here and probably have like part of a strap coming in because I'm assuming it straps on the inside. All right. I'm just adding a few folds over here. Okay, let's go through and do the rest of that armor. He's got like a central piece here that curves inward. Comes halfway between here and here. So I'm just, now that I know this is more or less symmetrical, I'm trying to measure where this came to on here on both sides so that I can get a symmetrical armor. And at this point, I'm going to start erasing the center line, part of the rib cage, because I no longer need that. Those are what are called construction lines. And I don't want to paint on those because that'll sort of seal them in place. Okay. And then I know I have these large stripes here. I'm going to make them a little larger. I want more coverage for the character. I think this armor doesn't offer a whole lot because there seems like a lot on the side. Also, this character I think is slimmer than the Hero Forge avatar. All right. And I have like a little bit of edging here and then two straps that sort of pull back like this. And keep them covered, kind of moving over the character's waist. And it looks like they come in and have like grommets or snaps that attach. I'm going to make some angled areas here as opposed to rounded, partially because the character is angled and partially because the holy symbol is crossroads and it's two roads diverging in different directions. So I want to use that shape as much as possible. I'm also I erased and redid it because I don't want these to touch. You want lines to either overlap or not come close to overlapping. Otherwise, you create what's called a tangent. All right. I'm realizing this doesn't look like it's snug enough to the character, so I'll put a little bit of a crease. And then since leather is thicker, I'm just adding an edge onto here. Okay. And I think the middle of the armor is plain, but the character is a cleric, and so they do have a holy symbol. So I want to make sure that we have that featured prominently over here. It is a crossroads with flames coming out of it. So I'm thinking I'll just do like the V, and then the V can be sort of like covered in flames on the top, and it can be kind of a simple symbol. Because I'm assuming the holy symbol is like the symbol of your god, but it's probably replicated a lot by different worshipers. So I would imagine maybe in books it's more complex, but for like a figurine or something, I'm assuming it's a little bit more of a graphic design / representation of whatever it's supposed to be. So I'm going to keep it pretty simple. There we go. Although I know this is really important to the character, so I'm going to just check the chat and make sure he's not screaming, "Oh no, don't do that." And I feel like it would make sense to have it on here. So maybe it goes over his armor and attaches this way. There we go. I do a really thin line, then I'm just going to do a bunch of loops for chains. Since this is kind of far away and it's not a close-up of the face, I'm not getting a ton of chain stuff. I think it's fine that it's just a bunch of loops because it does take forever to draw chain links, and I don't think this is the sort of thing that really has to be emphasized like that. Go. Okay. He says that holy symbol is fine, so we'll keep it like that. And then I want to make sure that I have his magnifying glass. And since magnifying glasses are often meant to be held, but this character is a traveler, I went through and I searched for a couple different like travel magnifying glasses, and I found this really cool design that I want to add on. I think maybe I'll just stick it, like over here. And it's like, I'm going to illustrate it separately since it's an important part of the character, and just have that as like, they're called function sketches, so that you can see how it works. So what you do is you have the way it works is a separate sketch, and then you have it like closed in the final sketch. But if someone is like, "Oh, hey, what is that?" then you have a separate sketch of it. So it flips out. It's like a piece of metal, and the magnifying glass is on here, but then over the metal is this like pouch. I'll do the pouch overlapping it. It's about the size and width of the glass itself, protecting it. And I would imagine on the side, it has like a strap or something. And then there's just like an area here where you can like see the metal edge of it so that you can pull it out when you need it. it's like a travel magnifying glass, and it's not the typical like handheld detective one, but I think it would travel a lot better because having a magnifying glass in a pack with all the stuff that adventurers have, I feel like is just sort of a recipe for broken glass. But this way it can stay on his person at all time and he can pull it off when he needs it. And it's not as in danger of breaking because it has like a protective shield sort of. For anyone else watching, I am adding the magnifying glass because it was specified in the character description. Although I think it's just because it went with the investigator background. Usually this isn't something that like I make a big point of pulling out. You know what? Maybe it makes more sense for, I think this is upside down. I think what I would do is I would have straps like here and here so that he can, and maybe they have like little snap-on buttons or something, so he can pull the button off. All right, so be like this shape. All right. On here, let's erase the siding. It'll still be here. And then I think he's got like a separate strap, or series of straps, like just holding them together. I think this probably would have been like a custom addition to the armor that he made. All right, there we go. Oh, and I need to do this sort of, I guess, cloth belt that he's got. So when you're doing a pipe fold like this, all you have to do is draw like an S shape, and then you draw lines going straight up, and you have a really nice zigzag 3D cloth. Make some of it just a little bit tattered. All right, I think that's it for the drawing. I'm gonna erase some of these little loops that I sketched in. I'll just have that in the final and illustrate that separately. Let's see, I'm just quickly looking through the other references I saved and making sure that there's nothing that I missed, and I'm just double checking the character's description that they sent just to make sure that I didn't leave out anything important. Oh, you know what? They specified the eye color, so I'll make sure I have irises and not just pupils. Eyeglass, holy symbol, headgear, calm, thoughtful, and cunning. I think that works. Okay, yeah, I think that's all the requirements we had. So I feel like we're at a pretty good spot here. I'm going to go ahead and start painting. Let's go ahead. I'm pulling up the Hero Forge character that he sent and just making sure that I have that available for color reference. I want to make sure that plenty of color. All right, so I'm going to start by talking about the color zones of the face. And even with blue skin characters or non-natural skin characters, I still use these. And regardless of what your natural skin tone is, it works. partially because regardless of what shade of like tan or white or brown or whatever you are, these color zones stay true, and you can be pretty much any color and they apply. So the top of your face from forehead up has more of a yellowish tint. The middle of your face, like around the nose and cheeks and ears, has a reddish tint. And the bottom of your face, like underneath the chin and underneath your cheekbones, has a bluish tint. Now, because this character is already blue, I might tint this like purple maybe just to make it a little more emphasized. But what I do for watercolor one is a really simple way of coloring kind of more cartoony characters, is that you lay down a flat color and then you block in the color zones. And then on top of that, you block in the cast shadows based on where your light source is. And after that, it feels pretty complete, even though you didn't spend a huge amount of time painting them. So I'm going to go through and mix up a blue color. They've got kind of like an aqua-ish color. I know they said they wanted ice blue eyes, and for some reason, I'm thinking the skin was a little darker. I'm just going to double check the sheet one last time, since watercolor isn't something you can erase. Yep, he just said blue. Okay, I guess we can do any shade of blue. I'll keep it kind of light, and then I'll go kind of dark red for the armor, but then a little bit brighter for the holy symbol, and the holy symbol will pop out because of the contrast, and so will the skin. So I do have kind of like an aqua-ish color. It's almost cyan, so I'm gonna wet that on my larger palette and bring that in. Just kind of mix that with an existing darker blue. Okay. I'm going to go through, I'm going to paint everything except for the eyes because I want to keep the whites of the eyes not blue tinted. I'll go through and paint that. And I have some extra water and paint here, so I'm just going to go all the way down to the neck. Make sure when you're painting that you have enough paint to block in all of the skin. So you don't want to mix a color for this and then realize you don't have the same color available for the hands, because even if they're shaded differently, you don't want the hands to have a different base color because you can't tell. So I'm going to take a little bit of this kind of desaturated yellow. Generally, you know, like right above the eyebrows, you have a lighter area. Go through, add some lighter areas there and over here, maybe down the bridge of the nose up until I get to the red zone of the color zone, the red of the color zone. There we go. And then I want to get like a nice earthy-ish red. It's going to turn purple probably when it mixes, which is totally fine. Usually whatever skin tone you're using is going to tint the way that your color zones come out. And I want to make sure that I have like the apple of the cheek nice and red, and also the lips tend to have a red color zone. So I'll clearly just tap a tiny bit of color in there. I'll probably come back later and pull at them a little bit more. And then I'll do like this kind of dark midnight blue that I've got over here for the bottom part of the face. So right underneath the lips, pulling into this area here. Oh shoot, I think it pulled in like a bead of black, which I do not want. You don't ever want to use grayscale when you're painting. It just kind of leaches the color and vibrancy out of the painting. And you know, like that may be the case in real life, but I, as an artist, really like to add color when I paint because you're adding life to something when you paint. Otherwise, why not just like take a photo or a screenshot or something? All right. I also realized that I forgot to add color to the ears. So I'm just going to re-wet the ears. Could be kind of faint. Notice that most of the pencil lines are still there. Some of them are less vivid, which is fine. All right. Go through and those shadow areas on the neck. I'm going to emphasize those a little bit. You can see that as I paint, like a lot of the pencil lines kind of fade away and they're harder to see. And that's kind of what I was going for anyway. I don't want my pencil lines to be the most prominent thing. It doesn't bother me really if they're there, but I don't want them to be like, you know, the main thing that you notice. I want it to be color first. So now that some of this has started to dry, I'm taking just a darker version of this blue that does have a little bit of black mixed with it. And I'm just kind of going into areas where there would be cast shadows. There are two kinds of shadows, form shadows and cast shadows. And form shadows wrap with the face, and cast shadows are because your light source is up here and something else is blocking the light source and casting a shadow on something that would normally be well lit. So for example, there could be some shadow here underneath the brow. There's usually a cast shadow directly under the lip. I'm going to go through, and I know if he has alopecia, he probably doesn't have eyebrows, but eyebrows communicate so much expression. I'm going to add the eyebrows. And if the character hates it, I can always go through in Photoshop and make them smaller, thinner, take them out. Not the end of the world. Generally with watercolor, while it's wet, you can move things around, but watercolor is one of those mediums where you kind of have to lay things down and be happy with your choices. But Photoshop can do a lot. I've done a lot of freelance projects that were initially watercolor, just became so intensely heavily photoshopped when edits that did not match the watercolor were asked for. You can do a lot with it, even if on paper there isn't as much editing. All right. Definitely a cast shadow, face and neck, some cast shadows in the ears. And usually you have a little bit of the blue color zone leaking through underneath the eyes. I'm going to go on with like an off-white for the whites of the eyes. And then he specifically said he had like ice blue eyes, so I'm going to go in with like a really intense color for that. And I think for the eye itself, I might go completely black because I do want that to be a focal point. So I'm going to be using a Micron pen. Micron pens are also waterproof, so whatever you draw with them, it's not going to spread. I'm going to wait until the eye is a tiny bit more dry, but I didn't use very much water, so I think I can go right in. And 005 is the smallest nib size you can really do. I'm just going to go through and emphasize the eyeball. I don't want this to be an ink-based painting, but I am going to go in and just go over the eyes because I want them to be powerful focal points. The eyes are really important for pretty much any character. All right, I'm going to go through now, and I'm going to take like a cooler red. Cool means closer to purple than orange. Just mixing a little bit of purple with it. Because I want some of that blue to be there. If we did a really like fire engine red for the lips, it would come off too much like they're wearing lipstick. There we go. And I'm going to put a tiny, tiny bit of that color on the bottom lip. Generally, since the top lip angles downward and the bottom lip angles upward, the bottom lip is a lot lighter than the top lip. So generally speaking, you just want to put a lot of shading into the top lip and make that darker. Yeah, I think that's working out just fine. Okay, let's go ahead and do the hands. Let's lay in some of that base color. I'm just laying in a tad more color on the other hand because I want it to be a little more in shadow. And I'll go back and emphasize this later. But this is a wet on wet wash, meaning that I'm adding to this while the base is still wet. So I'm expecting it to bleed some. I'm not trying to keep this completely segregated at the moment between the two hand colors. I will go over this with another color later, probably that darker blue shadow color. And I'm taking some of that red I used from the red zone of the face, making it a little more purple. And you don't have to do this. Some people do it for their characters, some people don't, but I'm going to lay it the knuckles and the tips of the fingers with a little pop of red. I think it just adds a little something extra to the characters. And I really like doing it, but it's a stylistic thing. And you can either leave it there, or what I like to do is just sort of like kind of with a dry brush and sort of tap it until it blends in a little bit more. I don't want it to be too evident. It just adds, like the idea of blood circulation, I guess. But I'm not going to add a ton of detail or paint to the hands. I want most of the focus to be up here. So we need to think of a color for the turban thing, and then I'll match the color on the armor. Maybe the armor has a couple of red accents here and here. Maybe we can kind of space that out so that the turban thing is also red, because if he chose red for his armor, he probably likes the color. All right. Let's go through and we'll start with the armor and then we'll put the other things on top of it, I think. So coming in with some brown, I'm just going to take some dark brown and add some red to it because I can see that there's sort of a reddish tint to the rest of his armor. Not just in the areas that are red, but notice that that brown seems a lot warmer or closer to red than it is cooler, closer to blue, which is nice. I think it helps make the skin pop out a little bit more. So I'm going to follow that. All right. And moving through, I'm going to go through and go around everything except for these little grommets, which should be metallic. And so I don't want to put any brown on them. I'm just going to sort of tap the area to release more paint once I've filled it, because I want this area to be a little bit darker. And if I do a lighter wash, that's not going to happen. But if you have a ton of paint on your brush when you paint, you're not going to have as much brush control. So what you want to do is you want to have as much brush control as possible. So lay in a light wash, and then while it's still wet, if you tap in more paint, it'll sort of self-fill where the wet areas already are. I want to make sure I do that before it dries. I'll use the same color for the straps, but that magnifying glass was not made to go with the armor. The straps may have been, but the magnifying glass was not. So I want the magnifying glass to have a different leather color, so I'm not going to use the same color. I'm going to mix a different color for that leather. All right, and it looks like the color over here is also that color. I made a mistake. I started painting this in, then I realized this was still wet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let it be wet for a while. And I'm going to continue pulling in this area very, very slowly so I don't get a hard line as it dries. And then hopefully once those hands are dry, I can finish it up. I'm just going to be filling things in. A tiny cut hair on my brush, probably because my office is currently being used to house a foster kitten. And I left these out all day. And yeah, we're just going to go through and lay in our colors slowly but surely, filling things up. You kind of have to be strategic about the way you pull things out, because you don't want to put two wet things right next to each other. And I don't know, at this point, it's just a little bit paint by numbersy. But you lay down your color and then you add, you know, like a shadow shade to it. And if this was a little bit more realistic and painterly, I might be adding some more light sources as well and giving like a tint, you know, like if he was near a fire, there'd be an orange glow to this side. But this is pretty flat. For basic character designs, I do what's called just flat local color. So there aren't other light sources interfering with what the character looks like, because it's not about being super painterly. It's about showing what the character looks like. I'm going to make this brown too, so that the red on the stripes pops more. Oh, you know what I should have done? I'm realizing the area around the stripes is part of that really soft blue shirt. After this dries, I'm going to go through and I'm going to add some lines for the shirt, which it looks like is just gray. So it's pretty neutral with like red and blue accents. It's nice. It's a simple color scheme. It's not overly complicated. Okay, I think, I'm gonna double check, but I think that's all the brown. And some of these areas where it's pooling, I'm going to pull this over. This feels pretty dry. I'm gonna go ahead and finish filling this in. So the reason why it's pooling in some areas is not others is because when you get certain areas wet for watercolor paper, the fibers actually expand. And since they don't have anywhere to go, since the areas over here are not expanded because they weren't wet at the same time, they're going to buckle either up or down. When they buckle down, they're going to create pools that catch more watercolor than others. So what I want to do is slowly to other areas as I watch this dry, add extra wash, or I want to pull this wash up just so that it dries a little bit more evenly. I'm trying to be a little bit meticulous about it. And that's why you see me moving around paint long after I've finished working or filling something in. All right. So let's go ahead and do some color mixing while we wait for the rest of this to dry. So I definitely want, it looks like there's a gray, like a cool gray for the shirt, but I think the shirt needs to do, I think it needs to be warm because I want the hands and the head to pop a little bit more and the rest of this to tint a little warmer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up a warm gray. So I already have a gray over here. It's pretty cool. I'm just going to plop it in some of my warm paint mixing areas and I instantly have a warm gray. That was pretty easy. I'm just going to go over this super lightly. And if I think it's looking a little too brown, I can go back and I can add some cool gray to it. I just don't want it to be so cool that it reads as like a desaturated blue because it's not going to make the hands pop out as much or the face, which are two of the more important things for the character. All right, that works just fine. And in between these straps, we'll have a bit of the shirt. Okay. I'm just going to go through and just pull out a couple areas where this would have like some folds or something, just so that it looks like cloth. I'm going to leave the rest of that be because this is still wet and I don't want to paint next to it. All right. But I do think these hands are pretty much dry. So I am going to go through and add some more shadows on the hands. And I'm kind of mixing this with the original skin color so it's not too far off. I just want to go in and shade this so that it feels darker and more in shadow. And when I get up here, I am still adding those reds. I'm just adding them a little bit darker. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Can you guys hear my Discord beeps? I'm running a campaign also starting soon that is 5e homebrew. And my players are getting excited about their characters because our session 0 is next week. So they're messaging me, seeing notices pop up on my phone. All right. And this can kind of like just move to shadow, and maybe I'll pull it up in some areas and have it fade back in others just so that it doesn't feel like it's a solid block. I want it to feel like it has some light and dark. So what I'm doing when I say pulling is while the paint is still wet, I'm taking a damp brush that doesn't have any paint on it, and I'm spreading it along what I've already painted, and it will pull up some of the color or absorb some of the color that is still wet onto my brush, because the brush is closer to dry than it is to sopping. It's just barely damp enough that it doesn't create any dry brush effects. Dry brush is like a texture that you use sometimes when your brush is super dry. Okay, and I think that then this here can kind of fade to shadow. I can add a tiny bit more over here. There we go. All right. Yeah, I think that looks okay. All right. I'm just going to pull up some of these other areas with a dry brush, because if I let them dry, they're going to dry super, super dark, because the pooling is all happening in those areas. And I don't want one part of the armor to be drastically darker or lighter than another part. Okay. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and grab some of this reddish color, but I'm going to mix it with something a little bit darker. I'm going to start adding, oh, maybe it's still too wet to add shadows. You know what? I think that gray is dry though. Yeah. So with the gray, I'll go through and just pick something a little bit cooler, a little bit darker. And all of those pencil lines that I made, I'm just going to trace over them, because I want that area to be emphasized. I want it to be clear that there are folds to this. It gives the impression that this is, like very thin, loose shirt. And it changes the way the fabric is perceived. So I want to make sure that it's still easily visible. And for anyone interested in the long-term campaign I will be running, I will also be doing art streams for that character art. And that will be running Tuesdays from 4 to 7 Pacific time. And it's going to be an RP heavy homebrew campaign that is all female or NB players. Right. Okay, this is working. While we do that, I'll wait for that to dry. I think it should probably dry enough that I can do the area next to them. So I'll start adding in some of that mid-tone warm gray over here, just to show that the shirt continues underneath the armor. Oh, and I should add that to the collar actually, if that's underneath it. All right. Sometimes you forget some pencil lines. I'm realizing I forgot a pencil line over here that will end the armor, but since I'm painting over the pencil lines, it doesn't really matter. And I can easily just sort of like tap into that area and paint over it, and people will assume the line continues there. Okay, I think that's everything. Oh, I need to do the straps on this side over here, which those colors are so similar. Honestly, I don't think anyone's going to notice. I'm also realizing that up here is also this shirt. Go ahead and fill that in. Still a little damp. So we'll go ahead and mix in the red color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, so that they go together, I'm going to take the reddish brown color I was using, and I'm just going to mix in a lot more red and keep that for the reddish armor. I'm not going to use the same shade for the reddish cloth, but I am going to use the same shade for the turban and the belt, since those are both cloth, and I'm assuming the character could have just gotten a big bolt of it and fashioned multiple things. Right. I think the character's armor is a little more saturated. I'm going to add some of this bright red, and I'm also going to darken it with some of these browns I mixed up. And just see if that works out to something kind of dark and desaturated. It's working out okay. It might need to be more red. Okay. I think that's fine. No, it's still not red enough. I'm just going to add some red directly over here. Mix some of that into here. Okay, that's better. All right. Oh gosh, that's still not red enough. I think it's fine. It's fine. We'll go really red with the fabric. That'll make up for it. No one will know. They read as separate colors anyway. Some watercolor artists, I think because watercolor is so precise, are a little more meticulous, and I'm a little more, it works, go with the flow. Which I guess maybe fits the watercolor medium a little bit better. But I'm not super duper OCD about exactly how precisely things are mixed. A little more free with color. Especially when it's fantasy art. All right, so we've got this. This color particularly is a little bit grainy just because it's so old, and I've used it a bunch of times, but I'm kind of liking that for the sort of mottled leather texture. So sometimes I go back and smooth it out, but I think I might just leave it as is, as it further distinguishes it is separate. So we'll go through this, and then after this, I'm just going to go back, and now that this seems dry, start adding shadows onto that. I'll go back, start adding shadows onto this. And that's just what we're going to do for the next, like, I don't know, 20 minutes. I realized Kat had asked me to take an hour and a half with this, but I think it's going to go a little bit over. So if I get cut off, I'm sure the, because I know she has to prep some stuff for another stream. I'm sure that you guys can see the finished version on the YouTube version of this and on Instagram, which I'll be posting to hopefully sometime next week. I try to do like panels where you do, you know, like one thing, and then you continue it, since, you know, it's a layer of 3 for Instagram. I've been doing textile designs alternating with maps, and I haven't made a map in forever. So I have all this other fantasy art that's like backed up that I need to post. But I really want to add another map because I had a textile design I was really proud of that I wanted to post. But I am quite close to finishing the map for my homebrew campaign, which has been mostly finished for like 6 months. But now that I'm actually getting to use it, I've been spending a lot more time on it. So I need to, it's pretty much finalized, but I need to actually transfer it to like nice paper and ink it out and label all the towns really nicely. So when I finish that, I can post another row, and then I'll probably post this. Okay, I think that's all the red leather. I'm double checking. Yes. Okay, I think that's it. So let's go through now and picking some just dark warm brown. We'll go through and we'll pull in some shadows over here. Nope, I think that needs to be a little darker actually. And there will be some shadows here. This would definitely be in shadow. And then after that, since these lines for the stitching I want to emphasize, but they're really small, I'm going to wipe a little bit of this on my dipping pen. And I'm just going to go through and draw with that. Oh no, it's having some trouble. May need to grab a new nib. Oh, no, there we go. I know the player's reference was reddish for this armor, but I'm kind of loving how orangey it's turning out, especially because orange and blue are complementary colors and they look really good together. Okay. Oh, thank you, Kristen. Oh, you have to get your Artena map scanned so you can label the towns. I do. There's this like font that I love called Tolkien, and I have like a mix of it because I do all my maps and I hand letter that font. But over like the years of doing maps, I've gotten kind of like my own style added to it. So now it's like a mix of this Tolkien font and like a mix of lettering the way I like to do it, sort of like a secondary version of it. So that's usually what I do for mine. And then I label as much as possible. And then if something comes up in game that needs to be labeled, I just type it out on like Discord on the chat or on the text feature. I'm just going through and I'm kind of emphasizing the lines that I want to emphasize now that I have this dark brown on my nib. And these are in shadow, so I can go a little darker than the dark gray. So I'll just very briefly emphasize some of these folds. This part can be kind of bereft of detail because it's foreshortened so much, and we're not going to look at it. We're going to mostly look at this side. Okay, and then I'm going to go in with a dark gray. It's kind of cool. There we go. And I just want to go through and re-emphasize this chain for the holy symbol. Oh yeah, I like the Tolkien font too. I was trying to find something like kind of mappy and it just ended up kind of working out. But I guess, you know, since that font feels very high fantasy, since it's what a lot of things are based on, that makes sense that I ended up running with it. All right, I'm just going through. I love these G zebra pens. That's the name of the nib that I use because you can get such tiny lines. So I can just make a ton of dots and it reads really well as stitching. Is what I'm doing right here. All right. Let's go through and let's add a separate leather color for that pocket spyglass or pocket magnifying glass. And it's kind of neutral. It's a little bit You know what, let's add a little bit of a cooler color to it so that it reads as different. I guess it's a little different. It's actually closer to the armor color than I was originally anticipating. But whatever, it's fine. I have a couple other browns in here I could just dump on top of it while it's still wet. There we go. Okay. Now we just have the turban, sash, and holy symbol. Oh, you know what? The holy symbol, I think it's fine if it's a different shade of brown, but I think for the armor, it would still be leather. So I'll block that in. Say it's like a different piece of leather, maybe. But I think if it's just leather armor, it probably would not be like custom colored. All right. Just because from the background I was given, it didn't seem like the character was wealthy. So I don't think they'd be able to afford like really fancy custom armor stuff. All right, I'm going to mix like a couple different colors together with this fire engine red to darken it, but I still want it to be a very warm red. And mix in a little bit of orange too, because I kind of loved that orange tint for the character. And I'm just going to sort of lay all of this in. And again, I'm just going to sort of lay it in as a wash and then go back and define the shadows at a later time. Okay, now it's coming together. I like how much that blue skin is being emphasized by all the warm tones. All right. I'm just taking a little bit of paint off my brush before I go around the face, because I don't want to accidentally paint it red. That's one thing with watercolor where like if I accidentally painted skin red, I can't really come back from that. So I have to be very, very careful around areas that people are going to look at and are not really open for changing too much. Okay, cool. I like that as a base color. I'm going to do that to the belt as well. And then we'll go through, we'll add some quick color to that spyglass, the holy symbols, come back and do some shading on the belt and turban, and then we'll be all finished. All right. And I've like not been looking at the chat very much, but as we are slowing down, does anyone have any questions about this painting fantasy characters in general or anything else I've been doing? One thing, I keep shifting my brush because you have more brush control at the tip as opposed to over here. So if I'm making a line and I want a precise line, I want the tip to be facing that line as opposed to the inside of the brush. And now again, I'm just sort of laying color in now that I've used a light wash to sort of get the area damp. All right. Right, there's the inside of the glass. And oh shoot, you know what? I did not save that brown. So I'll just put in some other random brown. And I do remember what color I dropped on top of it. Just adding some of the stitching here. I think that's pretty much it. Holy symbol. Okay, I'm assuming the fire is going to be red, but I don't really want to make the crossroads brown. I think I'll make them gray because gravel or stone roads can be gray, and I'm assuming whoever forged it probably used like, I'm assuming that there was like a metal base for it to attach the chain to, and then maybe this is either, you know, like stained glass, or I don't think it would be colored metal. I feel like that would be kind of hard to do. And you know, if it is metal, let me go back in with some white. I'll add a little bit of a highlight there. It's probably stained glass, but then it would break. I don't know what it's made of. Maybe it's like cut stone or something. So maybe like some garnet or like a semi-precious stone that's not as valuable as like a ruby or whatever. But I feel like if they were to segment it into multiple pieces, that would make it more expensive. So it's just going to be a solid color, and maybe like high priests and stuff. The 3 different segments of flames are, you know, like amber and garnet, and maybe the center one is like a ruby even. But the people who aren't super wealthy or super high up in the church just have like a single color for their flame. And maybe that's how you denote importance in the church, is like how many colors of fire are in their holy symbol that they wear, especially if they're this big and you wear them like on your chest. I feel like it's sort of something that you could sort of like low-key brag with. Just adding some little white highlights to make it look a little shiny. I'm not making them super bright because I don't think this is like crazy shiny, but it would be a little bit shiny. All right, and then the grommets, I feel like maybe like a bronzy gold, because I could do gray metal, but I feel like that doesn't really fit the warm tone for the armor aesthetic. Oh, my warmer colors, like my yellows, are all dry right now. So I'm going to wet those. And then as I wait for them to sort of wake up, I'll go through. I have a couple goldish colors here. Ooh, and I actually have some gold paint. I'll go through and do the outside of the magnifying glass. Metallic doesn't always show up. But I feel like this is something, since they're an investigator and it's very important to their character, this is something they would have spent some money on, even if they don't have a lot of money. So this could have like a nicer handle to it. And I think, yeah, the handle would be sticking out here a little, but it's pretty subtle. I'll go through and darken this. And one thing for making things look shiny is like you have to have high contrast. So there's going to be a couple areas that are kind of nice and gold, and then a bunch of areas that are a little darker, a couple areas that are highlights. I'll go back through. I can go in with like a white pen later too and add some highlights to it. Just adding some stitching on here. All right, then I'm going to go back to a more concentrated version of this turban and belt color. And I want to make sure that I block in all of the shadows first. So I think this entire area would be in shadow. Maybe just a few light areas, and then this whole area back here would be mostly in shadow, mostly because I want a little bit more contrast between the face and the rest of the body so that it pops more. So do that, and then I'll get my brush wet and just sort of wet it and drag it to the edge. So it's not as dark at the top, but it's still like kind of dark. I'll pull up a little bit of a highlight here. And kind of move these together. Okay. I also think this area, which frames his face, would be dark. All right. The rest of this can be a bit lighter. I want to go through and emphasize some of these shadows. Being kind of light with this. I don't want a ton of contrast up toward the top. I want most of the contrast down here. Otherwise, it's going to draw attention from the face. Which is why I'm not going as dark with the shadows that I'm grabbing. I'm letting them kind of fade out in darkness or value. Okay, that fits. I'm pretty happy with that. So we're going to go down, just do the same thing for the belt real quick. All I'm really doing is sort of tracing over the pencil lines, but I'm using a little bit of what's called dry brush technique here, is where your brush is very dry. So there's a little bit of a texture that's created when you pull the pen or the brush over it quickly. But I don't have a ton of contrast. I don't really want to emphasize any of these things. I may give it like a tiny bit of a frame over the holy symbol to emphasize it just a tiny bit more, but I think it's going to be pretty slight. There we go. All right. Okay, now my oranges are all warm again. I'm going to go ahead, wet again, and lay those in. I'm going to try and have a couple areas that have highlights on them. So I'm not coloring this in completely. I'm leaving some areas white. I like the idea of little like bronzy gold grommets that maybe they splurged on. Because they're a warmer color than like cold iron. I'm just mixing up a slightly darker version, well, a much darker version of that, because I want to have like a little bit of a shadow color on here too, right next to the highlight. That's how you make something look shiny, is you put something dark next to something really light. And with how small these grommets are, I don't think it's gonna carry across a whole lot. But the basics of it are there. And I think when you look at it, you can understand what it is. All right. And then I'm just going to go through with, I really like these white uni ball pens. And unfortunately they clog sometimes, but I want to add some highlights to, yeah, this one's clogged. I have like 3 of them. So let's see if one of them is working. Here we go. I just want to add a couple quick highlights to the darker parts of the magnifying glass handle here. There we go. Maybe I'll add a little bit of a highlight to the white of the eye. And just a couple areas that I think would have a little bit of shininess on them, you know, like the edge of the nails. Like emphasize a couple of these highlights on the buckles a little bit. Go through and just sort of like tap into some of these chain links. It just adds like a nice finishing touch to things. right. And there we are. That's everything. I think this guy's done. So I'll go over and I'll scan this. I'll, like delete any extra little lines or paint spots in Photoshop. And then I'll send this to be the avatar art for the player for the Artena campaign. All right, well, thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions. I'll be streaming, I think, 2 Tuesdays from now. I'll be doing 2 character arts as opposed to 1. So let's see, we started at 4 and it took almost 2 hours. So I guess depending on Kat's schedule, we might start around 2. But we'll be announcing it for Rainbows and Razor Blades on our Instagram, on our Twitter, and on Twitch closer to the event. Thank you so much for watching.